We're live, friends.
Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a second. It is fun watching the participants' numbers go up.
Look at the numbers climbing fast.
Oh, wow.
Lily, this will be sent out it'll be posted as a video, and we will be sending some follow-up emails as well. Hello from Oklahoma City. We'll give people just a couple more seconds and we'll get started. Hello from Minnesota, from Louisiana. We do have a nationwide audience. Varnia, North Carolina, Philadelphia, LA. Hey, Jennifer. Arizona, NYC, Oregon. Oh, wow. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. My name is David Gardinier, and I am one of the founding members of the Fund for Reparations Now. And we are so glad to have you tonight for the Fund's very first event, Black Labor and White Wealth, a Labor Day conversation on reparations with the National African American Reparations Commission. We have an agenda tonight that's absolutely packed with great stuff for you all. So we're actually going to jump in now and get started on time. Given that this is a virtual and COVID-proof event, I am coming to you live today from my home in downtown Los Angeles. And I invite you to, as you already have, use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to share where it is you're joining us from this evening. And I see we have people from all corners of the country. It's really exciting. For those of you who are new to our work, you may be wondering just who we are and how we all work together. So let's begin with a little bit of background. The National African American Reparations Commission, or NAARC, was launched in 2015 and is made up of distinguished Black professionals from across the country with outstanding accomplishments in the fields of law, medicine, journalism, academia, history, civil rights, and social justice advocacy. Since its founding, NAARC has emerged as a leading organization within the United States and global reparations movements. NAARC has also devised a 10-point reparations plan and is a staunch supporter of H.R. 40, the congressional bill that would establish a national commission to study reparations proposals for African Americans. The Fund for Reparations Now, or FFRN, is NAARC's coalition building arm for white Americans in support of reparations, and was launched last year to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans arriving in Jamestown, Virginia. The fund is administered and financed by its board of white Americans, of which I am a part, and we are committed to supporting NAARC's Black-led vision and the immediate implementation of their 10-point reparations plan. We are also a group of all volunteers, and like I said, this is our first attempt at putting an event together, so we appreciate your patience as we work through all of the kinks this evening. Today, we are fortunate to have 4 experts with us in the field of reparations, and we'll be hearing from them and answering your questions in just a second. For the remainder of the event, and now that folks have shared where they're at geographically, we're actually asking folks to refrain from using the chat function so that everyone can focus on our speakers. We do, however, want you to use the Q&A function for submitting your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as possible after our 4 presentations. Following this forum, and after a short break, we're going to be hosting a special interactive event for our FFRN financial contributors. If you would like to join that event, you are welcome to become a contributor of any amount using the link that we're dropping into the chat right now. We're Some of our members are standing by and will respond to your contribution with the link for that event, which is going to start 15 minutes after this forum is over. If you cannot make it to that event, but are moved to be a contributor, that is welcomed as well. And we've also included our email address for any questions that you may have. All of that said, and without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker this evening, Dr. Ron Daniels. There is so much that I could say about Dr. Daniels, but suffice it to say that he's the founder and president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, which is a progressive, African-centered, action-oriented resource center dedicated to empowering people of African descent in marginalized communities. He is also a convener of the National African American Reparations Commission. As a prolific essayist and commentator, Dr. Daniels' column Vantage Point appears in numerous Black progressive newspapers and websites nationwide. He is also a host of a weekly public affairs talk show, Vantage Point Radio, on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. Dear participants, please welcome to your screen the esteemed Dr. Daniels. Woo!
Well, thank you very much, David, and your enthusiasm is infectious. We're so delighted. First and foremost, I noticed you said the co-founder and so forth, but the real visionary behind the Fund for Reparations Now is David Gardinier, and we so appreciate your effort and your humility, but most importantly, your vision and your courage and your dedication to this cause. And you have approached it with the kind of respect that we think is appropriate in terms of allies of this movement. So we just really want to uplift you. You have such, again, enthusiasm and such, enthusiasm and energy for this project. So I want to begin by thanking you first. Also want to just, let me just say, because the important part you've already mentioned, it creates a lane for progressive, anti-racist whites and others, to contribute to reparations now. And that's an important contribution. Also, I just want to congratulate you and Karen for that powerful op-ed piece that was in the Boston Globe that has produced and precipitated great response. It is being discussed all around the country. We also just obligated to just thank the donors, many of whom are on the call today. Your testimonials. I have a chance to read some of these testimonials. They're just awesome. They're just powerful in terms of the desire to create a different kind of country based on cutting to the chase in terms of white supremacy, structural institutional racism, and the desire to repair the damages of centuries that have been damages inflicted upon people of African descent in this country. So I just wanted to quickly say that. Today we're talking about the whole issue of Black labor and white wealth. And our 10-point program, which has been referenced, is about overcoming that. I think at the end of the day, it is very important to understand, as probably many of you already know, that this nation would not be where it is today in terms of its wealth had it not been for over 400 years now of free labor that was extracted, the theft of 400 years of free labor, and the extraction of Black wealth, which has made America what it is today. And I think it's important because anti-racist whites are increasingly coming to the conclusion by various means of understanding that this does not mean that this is an individual question. It doesn't mean that you particularly were responsible individually. This is a structural institutional question in which, this nation benefited, but it also created white privilege. And also there's a way in which almost all white people benefited to some degree. Differential, yes, differences, because we have a class dimension here. Those at the top benefited most. But because of something called the acceleration principle and the multiplier effect, I was just listening today to people talking about the airline industry, and the airline attendants union was talking about, well, when we don't work, then it means that a whole lot of other people don't work, because there are ancillary industries that are associated with that. That's kind of the way you have to understand it, is that there are people who are not airline attendants, they're not pilots, they don't fly these airlines, but they benefit from the fact that they exist. And that is the way we have to look at the whole question of enslavement. And so, you know, our commission is really dedicated to a 10-point program, which you can obviously view to deal with that. And in that regard, you know, we have put together a concept of a national reparations finance authority to talk about how we ultimately are prepared to receive reparations from whatever source. But I want to call your attention to the fact that we believe that individuals can benefit through what we call direct benefits, but also through community benefits. And a lot of the emphasis we place on, we in NAARC places on collective benefits. How do we structure programs that deal with rehabilitating, revitalizing, refurbishing, healing communities in relationship to healthcare, economic development, education, all of these systems that have been damaged in many respects because of centuries of enslavement. And so that program, our program is a centerpiece. We want you to take a look at it because it again addresses the issues that we're talking about. Also, David's also referenced HR 40. The National African American Reparations Commission is literally, you know, convening the strategy sessions to push HR 40, which is a bill now, not just to study, but to study reparations proposals for African Americans, not if reparations should be forthcoming, but in what form. We're also, you know, dealing with local reparations in terms of looking at cities that are coming forward with reparations proposals. The most recently we just certified Evanston, Illinois as a model for local reparations. And finally, the 10-point program lends itself to the work that you are doing collectively for the Fund for Reparations Now, but that many of you are interested in. Specific projects, and the project which we have we're working on and envisioning is one that will be very significant. It has to do with one of the massacres and tragedies that is little known in Elaine, Arkansas, and later on you'll hear about that and ways in which, again, this extraction of Black labor, this extraction of Black wealth, and the terror and oppression of Black people as a way of extracting that wealth can be repaired through the work that you are committed to. So I'll just say this is a great conversation. We appreciate so much you joining us. And now I turn it back to our esteemed moderator, David Gardinier, to introduce our next panelist.
It was inevitable to unmute. Thanks so much, Dr. Daniels. Our next speaker this evening is Dr. Don Rojas, who has become one of the most trusted advisors for the Fund for Reparations Now. Mr. Rojas is the Director of Communications for the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, editor of their website, and a member of their board of directors. Before joining the Institute of the Black World in 2013, Rojas served as Executive Director and CEO of Free Speech TV, a Denver-based multi-platform national media network, as well as a general manager of Pacifica Radio's WBAI in New York City. If we were all together, this is the part where we'd now be hearing the thunderous applause, but please do your best to digitally welcome Mr. Don Rojas.
Thank you very much, David, and good evening, sisters and brothers. Before I make my presentation, I'd like to take a moment to echo what Dr. Daniels said at the beginning of his presentation, and that is to applaud David Gardinier for his courage, his vision in creating the Fund for Reparations Now, and also for reaching out to us at the National African American Reparations Commission, NAARC, reaching out to us to explore partnership and a collaboration in order to push the reparations movement deep into the vibrant white-based, mostly white-based anti-racism movement in this country, And let me send a shout out to members of Surge, that is showing up for racial justice, who may be viewing this seminar. Thanks to David, and also, you and Karen and Dr. Daniels referenced it, and other FFRN board members have done a remarkable job in getting this vital process started. So let's keep it going in the weeks and months ahead. Folks, contrary to the conventional wisdom, slavery is not America's original sin. It is America's original crime. Described by the United Nations as a crime against humanity. The reparations narrative today is fundamentally about a crime unpunished and a debt unpaid. America owes an historical debt to Black and brown people, and reparations means repaying that debt. It's a debt so large as to defy accurate accounting. There is no rug that is wide enough to cover up the magnitude of these crimes. Consider for a moment the essential nature of chattel slavery as it was practiced throughout the Americas for centuries. Human beings as property to be bought and sold and auctioned and even used as collateral. This was the wholesale theft of vast amounts of wealth produced by coerced and oppressed Black labor and reinforced by an ethos of anti-Black violence rooted in white supremacy. This violent crime, in my view, constitutes one of the most horrific mass abuses in the entire history of human civilization, a monstrous debt that has never been repaid, and there's never been reparatory justice for the victims of this crime. No restitution for the often whipped and flogged Black bodies that built the foundations of US capitalism. It is practically impossible to place a dollar value on this enormous theft, not only of wealth produced by uncompensated Black labor, but also the theft of cultural identity, religion, language, customs, etc., etc. Chattel slavery in the United States and the rest of the Americas is not a thing of the past. The legacy lives on today, and it constitutes and it continues to adversely impact the lives of all of us, Black, brown, and white. It is not something that is foreign to us. We cannot ignore it or wish it away. Up to 1868, Black people provided America with, now check this out, 246 years of free labor. Try to wrap your head around that for a minute. America became and remained an economic superpower due in large part to the contributions of Black America's blood and sweat equity, if you will. We often talk about the unpaid wages of slavery, but we almost never talk about how free Black labor benefited even those who did not own slaves. The cotton merchants, and I think Dr. Daniels touched on this, the cotton merchants made higher profits because they bought cotton cheaply. The shipbuilders, the textile industry, the sugar industry, the international traders, etc. And every free person in America benefited from the free labor of Blacks, which propped up the entire US national economy. In the interest of time, I'm going to just fast forward to my wrap-up remarks. And so here we are today, trying to stay sane in the dark and vile madness of Trumpism. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, tens of millions of white Trump supporters have chosen the cancer of white supremacy over the promise of a people-oriented democracy. They have chosen to defend their individual white skin privileges and entitlements. The democratic rights of everyone else be damned. And the right-wing media like Fox News, Breitbart, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and the others weaponize the language of racial bigotry day in and day out. This is the America we live in. So in this hostile climate, the reparations movement is challenged to be steadfast and focused. One way to fight back is to provide ongoing support for the HR 40 legislation that Dr. Daniels talked about. that is currently being led by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. The new version of the original John Conyers bill will stress remedies over studies. Another way to fight back is to support the Fund for Reparations Now and to urge your family, friends, and colleagues to do the same. Sisters and brothers, justice demands restitution, and until there are reparations, there can be no justice. Until there are reparations, anyone who pledges their allegiance to a flag that stands for a country with, quote, liberty and justice for all, is living a lie and profiting from a theft. That's the frank and hard truth. So to redeem the soul of America, reparations must be paid, and it must be paid now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rojas. And good news, in an unprecedented event, we are ahead of schedule. So that will mean more time for your question and answers. So please be using the Q&A function rather than the chat. And we will do our best to get to as many of those questions as possible. Our next speaker is Dr. Julianne Malveaux, who is President Emerita of Bennett College for Women. She is an economist, author, and commentator whose popular writings have appeared in USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Miss Magazine, Essence Magazine, The Progressive, and many more. On a personal note, I first became acquainted with Dr. Malveaux's work on Juneteenth of last year by watching her deliver her expert testimony to Congress at their hearing on HR 40. Dr. Malveaux, your unforgettable testimony made me laugh, it made me cry, and it was an absolute honor, and it is an absolute honor to share the screen with you today. So please take it away, Dr. Malveaux.
David, thank you so very much. And I want to thank the others in the Fund for Reparations Now for the work that you're doing. We really appreciate the fact that you had reached out to us to talk about ways that we might work together. And so that's fantastic. I don't know if I can be heard. Am I being heard?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, cool. But anyway, we're just all very grateful. This represents an opportunity to basically change the narrative just a bit about how we go about this reparations issue. All too often you hear many white folks say, I didn't have any slaves, so I don't need to basically deal with this issue. But as both Dr. Daniels and Brother Rojas said, the foundation of American capitalism is enslaved labor, the absolute foundation of it, the bond market, enslaved labor. So we need to deal with that. And this is an ironic time to have this conversation when we have a person in the house that enslaved people built. And that's what I call 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, to remind us that enslaved people built that. But in the house that enslaved people built lived someone who would like to cancel history. So while they would leave Confederate names on statues, they just pass a reg that they don't want to talk about white privilege in any of the trainings that basically the Treasury Department and others have commissioned. So just leaving it there, we can't eliminate this history. This history has enormous legacy of where we are now. What I want to talk about a bit is the issue of white economic envy and what it's cost. And white economic envy happens when Black people make too much progress. Now, as Don Rojas said, America had 246 years of free labor. After Reconstruction, theoretically, I mean, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments passed, and theoretically we were quote equal. Not. There was about a 12-year period, not even 12, maybe 11-year period where African-American people were gaining rights in the South. They were protected at some level by the Freedmen's Bureau, but at the same time, there was a heavy push to re-enslave Black folks, if not directly, indirectly through the legalization of inequality. So the law basically protected whites, forbade Blacks from having any rights whatsoever, excused whites when they raped, robbed, lynched Black people. Nobody in the history of this country, almost 5,000 people lynched, nobody ever stood trial for it. And so the very presence of Black people allowed people to create a parallel enslavement where Black labor was extorted, where Black land was stolen. I'll tell a couple of stories. One, well, they're all, I won't say they're my favorite stories, but they're all telling. The first lynching that Ida B. Wells documented was the lynching of Thomas Moss in Memphis, Tennessee in 1892. Tom Moss was a postal worker, a dad. He, on the social scale, he was about as high as he could get. He opened a store called the People's Grocery because a white man named William Braggart had a store that was nasty. Black women didn't like to go there. They had gambling in there. He had more than 10 citations for alcohol that he wasn't supposed to be selling. So Thomas Moss opened a store, a competing store. And the attitude was, how dare you Black people compete with us? So on a ruse, two young boys got into it over marbles, one white, one Black. That was a ruse. And you often find with lynchings and this kind of economic envy, there was a ruse. So the ruse was that the Black boy cheated the white boy. White men with guns went to basically, quote, fix the situation. And instead they met Black men with guns. Well, fast forward, the three men, Tommy Moss and his friends, were arrested. And then they were taken to jail. And then they were taken from the jail and lynched. Afterwards, William Braggart was able to get the competing store at 8 cents on the dollar. So the purpose was to drive this Black man out of business, although nobody really ever said that. We can talk about Wilmington, North Carolina, where whites became afraid because the newspapers talked about the new Negroification of Wilmington. And so people, one night when there were white Republicans, the radical Republicans, and African-Americans had formed a coalition, the white folks, the Democrats said, no, this is not gonna happen. They called them the red shirts, a nice word for the Klan. And the night before the election, they arrested all the prominent Black men, gave them one-way tickets out of town, forced them to leave their property and their livelihood. There's so many more stories like that. One of the most riveting is the story of Anthony P. Crawford. On October 21st, 1916, in Abbeville, South Carolina, Mr. Crawford was lynched. The Crawford story was that he had land that they called prime cotton land. He had 427 acres of land. It was valued at $20,000 in 1916, or more than $500,000 today. He also was a brother who took no stuff. One of the newspapers described him as rich for a Negro and insolent along with it. He was going to sell some of his cottonseed to the downtown store. There was a dispute about what the cost of cottonseed was. Mr. Crawford observed two white farmers getting 90 cents a pound for their cottonseed, but he was offered 85 cents. He said no. He said a number of things, including he would rather throw his cottonseed in the river than to give it to the guy who was trying to cheat him. Now, he did use a little profanity. He said he would rather throw the cotton in the damn river. For that, he was arrested for cursing a white man. He was arrested for cursing a white man. They told his bail was $15. He went in his pocket and got it. I mean, he had it like that. He went and got his bail money out of his own self pocket and said, okay, here. Well, the next thing you know, he was lynched. And then the town hall, the town council had a meeting and voted that the entire Crawford family had to leave. They seized their property, the 427 acres. Two of the main lynchers were named executors of his property. And so what we see often with this white economic envy and theft, that land was often the motive for this and these ruses. There are so many other stories. I know I don't have a lot of time. Let me just mention sundown towns. There are more than 2,000 sundown towns in the United States that were established as early as the mid-18th century, mid-18th century, and some may still exist, although informally. The challenge with sundown towns is they were often established after, again, a ruse. Black people had too much land, or Black labor was competing with white labor. And so something would happen, there would be a lynching, usually there'd be a lie, a white woman was raped, then there would be a lynching, and then people, they would put those signs up that says, all you know what's, be out of here by sundown. Sometimes people were given a couple weeks. In the case of Anthony Crawford's family, they were given 2 weeks to leave, to manage their affairs and leave. But in any case, the enormous loss of land, enormous loss of economic agency, and that really contributes to today's wealth gap. What we have to know is that before the end of Reconstruction, Black people have been making enormous progress. We wanted to be free. We weren't looking for the 40 acres and a mule, although it would have been nice, but we didn't get it. And so what ended up happening is that we ended up just basically losing. In some cases starting over, in some cases not starting over at all. And this white economic envy is at the root of much of this. It's really, how dare you be Black and succeed? And at the end of Reconstruction, we had succeeded. The last Black man who served in the United States Congress, George White, in his farewell speech, he listed what Black people had and what we had accomplished, how many businesses we had, how many schools we have been funding. And this was just unacceptable to white people. They just could not stand the notion that Black people had been able to accumulate. And so, of course, the other story, and I know I'm rolling low on time, so somebody should probably remind me, I see I have a minute. The Tulsa, Oklahoma story is completely driven on a white economic envy. The governor of Oklahoma actually commissioned a panel to find out why Black Wall Street was destroyed. And the answer in an official government document was too many N-words have too much money. The Black people did have a lot of money in Tulsa. They had doctors, pharmacists, department store owners. They couldn't use the hospital, so they built their own churches. A Black couple owned a movie theater. Another brother owned a mechanic shop. So, again, the roots, understand the roots. A Black boy, he was 19, young man, supposedly attacked a white girl, Sarah Page, who was 17. Never happened. She never pressed charges. It never happened. But just because of that, and the newspaper, the media played a horrible role, "To lynch a Negro tonight" was the headline in the newspaper. So I need to stop here. I know that my time is up, but the point is that you don't have to have been the victim of a lynching or the victim of any of this white economic envy, because what it did is set the tone to the point that if you read Richard Wright's Black Boy, he has a whole section about how even hearing about a lynching dampened his willingness and ability to participate in the larger society. And that was the purpose, to dampen our interest and ability to fully participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malveaux, for your always great account of history and what it means for us today. Our last speaker is Reverend Dr. Iva E. Caruthers. Dr. Caruthers is the General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, which is a premier justice network of faith communities, clergy, and lay leaders in the prophetic tradition of the Black Church. As co-founder of the organization in 2003, she has guided its development and impact, including being granted NGO status at the United Nations. Professor Emeritus of Northeastern Illinois University, she has also served as a visiting professor at over 8 institutions. She has mentored many students and led study tours throughout the diaspora and Africa, lectured on 5 continents, and presented at the United Nations. As if that weren't enough, she happens to hold a few advanced degrees in counseling, psychology, and theology, and has completed postdoctoral studies in international affairs, biostatistics, and African art. Dear participants, please give a hand wherever you are to Dr. Caruthers.
Thank you and good evening to all. And David, I too want to express my deep appreciation for your leadership and the work that I know is going to bear much fruit from the Fund for Reparations Now. In addition to all we have already heard by my colleagues, I just want to extend what they have said. And I think I will begin by a caution that we should always remember that reparations is more than a financial transaction. Dr. Julianne and I had not spoken, but I think one of the most significant takeaways I can leave with you is for us to remember that what we're talking about is not just the past, but what we're talking about are the consequential damages that have been and are transgenerational. They impact us right now. And also to put a face on it. As I mentioned, Dr. Julianne and I had not spoken, but Anthony Crawford's great-granddaughter is my goddaughter. And so I shared the journey with her. She died at a young age, but before she died, she had made significant strides as a historian to go and find the history of her family and present it to the world. And it has made such a difference in where we are in our capacity to tell the narrative. And so let us be reminded that we can put a face on this. This is not just past history. And with that in mind, I want to reiterate the point that I think Don Rojas left us with. There is not enough money in the world to pay for the transgenerational harm that people of African descent have had to endure. People in this country, in the diaspora, and in the continent in Africa. So by any definition, we have endured crimes against humanity and strategies of genocide over the past 400 plus years. And in the words of Ida B. Wells, the way to right wrongs is to first turn the light of truth upon them. And so NAARC is committed to being an instrument to tell that truth. We're about to approach 2021, and that is the centennial year of the Tulsa Massacre. The Tulsa Massacre began on the morning of May 31st and resulted in the murder of hundreds of African-American residents, burning down over 1,000 homes and businesses and stealing their property and destroying what was considered to have been the Black Wall Street. 35 square blocks of an all-Black Greenwood district. Imagine 35 square blocks. Another story, because the more things change, the more they stay the same, of a Black man accused of sexually assaulting a white woman, arrested and jailed in a county courthouse. A group of Black men tried to protect and defend the man, fearing he was going to be lynched. The charges against the man were later dropped. And you fast forward and you can see the claim for reparations, the claim of lawsuits have been filed and litigated and refiled. And the evidence can speak for itself, but it shows, most importantly, that mobs, including members of the Tulsa Police Department, the Tulsa County Sheriff's Department, and the National Guard were co-conspirators and perpetrators, just like so many of Men in Blue today. And then we have what we must understand to find the voices from the graves crying out today, because now we have discovered that the ancestors of the enslaved and that massacre are speaking from their graves from the New York Stock Exchange all the way to Ghana. Please know that New York was a slave port, and it was founded by the Dutch West Indian Slaving Company. And it resulted in investment being but an extension of the transatlantic slave trade. Literally and figuratively, the New York stock market, which we are claiming today as being prosperous, is founded upon the enslavement of Africans. Lloyd's of London today, Aetna Casualty today, New York Life Insurance today, Lehman Brothers and R.J. Reynolds today, and even J.P. Morgan Chase and Union Pacific today are just a few of the existing companies whose early origins are connected to this slave trade. And these companies and others should be targets for constructive reparations and reparatory justice. In 1991, the federal government unearthed the burial ground that is contiguous to the New York Stock Exchange. And findings of these subsequent examination of the enslaved included children. 40% of the graves were children under the age of 12. Let us put a face on this narrative. The federal government, like you might expect it is doing today, wanted to make pretend that didn't exist, and they attempted to proceed with plans to build upon the grave site. However, African Americans organized and enraged and created a protracted national battle to honor this site. And the blessing is that in 2003, African Americans also returned some of those remains to sacred burial grounds in Ghana, West Africa. It was Tulsa Wall Street then, and it's the New York Stock Exchange now. So let us tell the truth and put a face on it. 1919 was also the centennial year of the Elaine Massacre. The Elaine Massacre was also among the worst instances of racial violence in American history. Elaine, Arkansas is 90 miles from Memphis and is situated in the Delta, where the land is very fertile. Returning soldiers from World War I expected to be treated with dignity, only to find the opposite. When they attempted to organize their land, their productivity, and their labor, they were met with an effort to reinvent enslavement. As Blacks, they were worshiping and organizing in a church, Hoopsburg Church. And vigilantes came and started a massacre that lasted for days and spread across the entire region. And that began what is now called the Red Summer. Hundreds were murdered, and state-sponsored violence, as well as a corrupt judicial system, played in the hands of inhumane and genocidal acts against people of African descent. Family, the meta-narrative is the same. The details and location may be different. Both represented the murder of men, women, and children, the theft of land and labor that continues to have consequences today, yes, today, for African-American families and communities. Today, I speak from Chicago, home to where significant populations from both massacres left in a quest for a safer environment, including my own family, part of whom just absolutely got fed up and left the country and settled in Brazil, where I now have 5 generations of family members. The families of historian Dr. John Hope Franklin from the University of Chicago, John Rogers, the CEO of Ariel Capital in Chicago, and the Honorable U.S. Congressman Danny Davis, all of these families escaped these massacres. So whatever success they have achieved, it has been despite the trauma and the injustices that their foreparents suffered. The organization I'm privileged to serve has been involved in what we call sacred memory work that includes the planning and implementing rituals and commemorative events as a part of the healing of communities and families. It includes hosting commissions, truth commissions, to garner, curate, and archive the truth. Last year, we held such a commission in Elaine in collaboration with the community, and our documentary, which was named Hush Mouth, was produced and distributed all over the nation. Hush Mouth, we called it because after the massacre, the people were told, just come on back to work and practice hush mouth. Don't say a word. Well, tyranny cannot be forgotten until there is restitution and a reckoning. And truth does bring light. So the Elaine Legacy Center continues to fight for reparations and truth, and we are on the journey with them. Yesterday, as a part of preparing for tonight, I made a call and got my current update with the Elaine stakeholders, and they wanted me to share with you, and we affirmed that there is a lot to be done, and they're excited about your engagement. Specifically, there is a project plan to reconstruct a museum on the historical registry, which will honor the native persons and the other 2 massacres in Elaine. They welcome your support and are encouraging you to keep moving forward with your effort. We know there is evidence of the records of the theft and the brutality that occurred, orchestrated by one particular family, and those records are in the county clerk's office. They wanted me to let you know that the location of the files requires younger people who might tolerate an environmentally compromised situation. They also want me to share that there is oral history to suggest where the mass graves are, and they need drone technology to support their efforts to identify those graves. All of these projects are possible projects for which they welcome your support. Having said that, and in view of why we have gathered today, I will end by suggesting one last takeaway. In this moment of Black Lives Matter, it is essential that allies understand the need to, with good intent, not only make amends, but also to bring along others to understand that a cultural transformation shift has to occur. A spiritual transformation shift has to occur. A healing to reset the test of reparations that requires an agreement and a covenant of non-repeat. A non-repeat of such horrendous behaviors. And I say that because in the centennial protest mantras, from Sojourner Truth declaring, "Ain't I a woman?" to Martin Luther King saying, "I am a man," to this generation's demand, Black Lives Matter, the focus is on Black humanity. I want to suggest that it is now time for allies to raise the question with their communities as to where is their humanity? If you can dare justify shooting folks in the back holding their t-shirt, or see them walking away with their hands up and still shooting, or find them sleeping in their beds and shoot nonetheless. So let us start beginning to ask a different set of questions, and a necessary one to reset the standard of civility in the process of our quest for reparatory justice. Thank you for having us this evening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Caruthers, for speaking such deep truth with us this evening. And we look forward to the continued work in Elaine. For those of you who are new to the fund and our work, the first point of the 10-point plan that we're going to be funding is point 9, which is African American monuments and sacred sites, preserving and creating those. And so the leadership of NAARC has identified Elaine as the first place where we'll be implementing a project there. So please stay tuned for more on that. We're going to go ahead and get started now to the Q&A. And this is just for any of the panelists. Someone is asking, is there a way for the work, for abolition and reparations to be connected? I'm assuming this is coming from how often we hear in the news about about abolition these days and defunding the police.
Let me take a stab at that by saying that while the abolitionists were good people with great intentions, they never dealt with the issue of how to make formerly enslaved people whole. They fought for freedom, but they did not fight for wholeness. And so while everyone is very cognizant of what abolitionists had done, and we also understand that the abolitionists, who were white women, were racist to the core. And we need to just acknowledge that as well. These were women who said that they would not support the vote for Black men. They fought for emancipation, but they would not fight for a Black male vote. So while these things happen, abolition, great movement, lots of good people came out of it. Frederick Douglass, very involved with it, but it's not a substance, it's not anything, I don't think it has a relationship with reparations. If I could find documentation that suggested that abolitionists were interested in making people whole, providing some reparations to do something, I would have a different answer. But for now, I just say, nope.
Let me add to that and say there's a different context for perhaps that question as well, which is abolitionists in terms of police violence and the need to abolish the police. And so the connectivity is absolutely there in that context. if we want to begin in more recent times with Richard Nixon's pronouncement, that we have to create a system to get rid of the Blacks or to control the Blacks without them knowing it's a system, we can fast forward to the implications that the use of COVID-19 is taking and the public policy that is coming out of it that connects this mission to create a ubiquitous, almost creeping up of genocidal policies that will allow for the continued control and exploitation of Black humanity. And in that sense, there is no doubt that we can connect Nixon's forthtelling, the subsequent systems of mass incarceration, the continued disparities and the consequences of that and the harm that's done to Black families and communities, et cetera, with the police violence today, and make a strong case for reparatory justice and reparations. And so in that sense, the abolitionist movement, many of those on the street demanding that you just abolish the police, is a legitimate frame of reference to discuss what it means to create transformational spaces for Black human dignity to flourish.
I would also quickly say that one of the points in our 10-point program, agreeing with Dr. Caruthers, speaks to the need to transform the criminal, I think we call it the criminal injustice system. So they're very synergistic.
Thank you so much. Another question is a very practical one. How will HR 40 work or be implemented?
Well, the way that HR 40 is set up is that there will be a commission established. There are representatives that will be appointed by the president. There'll be representatives that will be appointed by the Congress of the United States, and then there will be representatives from the community as involved in the commission as well. And so these commissioners will have a budget. I think there's even a stipulation in the legislation that there will be a budget, and they will go about the business of examining, again, not if reparations should be paid, but in what forms reparations should take. So it is an increasingly, it's a very powerful piece of legislation. It is a piece of legislation that many of us, I think as of today, maybe 151 to 153 sponsors. Maybe the highest previously may have been about 50. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is in an all-out push to get that number up to 160 to 170. Pressure is mounting. It enjoys the support of the House leadership, but there's competing bills and competing things, all of which are important, but there's a need to make sure that this bill actually hits the floor and is passed. But in general terms, that's the way it will operate. The key distinction is that we're no longer looking at studying whether or not reparations are warranted, but looking at in what forms it will take. And this commission will examine that, and people like NAARC will have a voice in that. We would be eligible to be a part of the commission. And in fact, our 10-point program is designed to be a frame of reference of the kinds of reparations that we think are important.
Right, if I could just jump in real quickly, there have been a couple of people who asked how they could be involved. You can find out whether your member of Congress has co-sponsored HR 40, and if they have not, you should call them and encourage them to do so. It would be lovely if we had, we have 150, but there are 435 members of Congress, so it would be lovely if we could have more. So if you could go on IBW21.org, or you could go to, you can Google HR 40, and there will be a list of who's co-sponsored. But it would be really good if we had our allies join us in encouraging members of Congress to co-sponsor.
Let me just quickly add, Don, I think that the NCOBRA HR 40 primer is in the Resource
Yeah.
Center. If you
Yes,
go
it is.
there, it's an incredible, powerfully written piece by the NASA Coalition for Reparations for Blacks in America. It has an interactive map in there, but it's interesting because they also illustrate how the basic principles of international law would interface with our 10-point program and give illustrations of what it would look like. So if you go to the IBW website and go to the Reparations Resource Center, you will find, by the way, a vast amount of resources. But the NCOBRA Reparations Primer is the place that you would find a ready resource that you can digest.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniels. Unfortunately, looking at the time, it is now 4:55 on the West Coast, which means that our time together has already come to an end, at least with the NAARC commissioners. And while this program may be over, we certainly hope that our conversations with all of you are not. You can learn more and stay connected with both NAARC and FFRN by visiting our websites, which we
David, you're muted. You have to unmute. Can't hear you.
David, we lost you.
Lips are moving. and
Unmute.
There we go. Sorry. So you still have about 20 minutes or so to use that bottom link to contribute any amount and join us at the community building event that is beginning at 8:15 p.m. Eastern, 5:15 Pacific. We've heard so much tonight about our country's deep need for reparations and a little bit about some of the tangible ways in which they could actually become a reality. The Fund for Reparations Now exists to usher in that coming America in which federal reparations are a reality and the deeper racial healing we so desperately need is possible. If you would like to be a part of building that vision, then we invite our fellow white allies to take the 3 action steps on our website of signing our collective statement of apology, paying into the Reparations Fund, and accessing resources to help you on your lifelong anti-racist journey. We also invite our Black participants and participants of color to support NAARC directly by contributing to them directly and by signing up for their newsletters on their website. We will be sending out some follow-up emails. We will try and address some of the questions that we weren't able to get to this evening, and apologize for lack of time, and really appreciate all of your enthusiasm, and of course appreciate the deep, deep expertise and knowledge that our panelists shared with us this evening, and for your ongoing work and for the amazing vision that is the 10-point plan. So thank you so much. And for all of you who joined us tonight as attendees, we are profoundly grateful for your interest in this event and for your ongoing work in supporting Black visions for our collective path forward and advancing reparations in your communities. We hope to see you again soon, and thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Kudos.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.